The saloon froze the moment the rancher's words split the smoke-thick air. "I will not accept her. She is no virgin." The sentence struck harder than a revolver shot, silencing the clatter of poker chips, the rattle of glasses, even the lazy chords of the piano. Men stiffened mid-drink, and women glanced sideways, their whispers swallowed by the stillness. Outside, coyotes sang to the desert moon, and the wind pressed against the swinging doors, as though the whole world had paused to hear a woman's fate. Neeja stood alone beneath the wavering light of the oil lamp. Her wedding dress, once a symbol of promise, hung heavy on her shoulders, lace dulled by trail dust and sweat. Her veil clung damply to her cheek, framing eyes wide with shock. She had left the chapel minutes before, still clinging to hope, still believing she might have a home. But Samuel Harker, the cattle rancher who had spoken the words, had ended that hope before it had a chance to breathe. He spat a line of tobacco juice into the sawdust and leveled her with a glare cold enough to stop a horse mid-gallop. "I won't give my name to a woman tainted," he said, voice pitched so everyone could hear. "A wife must be pure, or she ain't no wife at all." The words landed like stones against her chest. Around her, the crowd shifted uneasily. Some lowered their eyes, others let their curiosity burn freely, taking in her shame like it was a stage show. To be cast aside was worse than humiliation. It was a death sentence. In the West, a woman without a husband, family, or protection was as good as abandoned to wolves. Neeja tried to breathe, but each gasp was sharp and shallow, as if the air itself refused her. She wanted to cry out, to tell them she was more than what Samuel claimed, that worth was not measured by what men demanded to take. But her voice refused her command, trapped behind clenched teeth and a throat tight with despair. The piano player muttered, "Hell of a wedding," before slamming the lid shut. His words earned a scatter of nervous chuckles, but most only tightened the silence, leaving it heavy as storm clouds. Neeja swayed where she stood. Dreams of safety, of a hearth and children, of belonging to something greater than her own shadow, all of it dissolved like dust in the wind. Her parents had died crossing the Oregon Trail, and Samuel had been her last chance to anchor herself to a future. That anchor had just been cut loose, leaving her adrift in a sea of unforgiving stares. Samuel tipped back his hat and spat again. His voice was colder now, more final, like a noose cinched tight. "Leave, Neeja. Ain't no man in this town gonna take what I won't. You'll get nothing from me. No land, no home, no name. You're on your own." On her own. The words rang inside her skull like hammer blows. She staggered, her skirt sweeping through sawdust and whiskey stains as she stumbled toward the doors. The veil caught on the corner of a chair, ripping as she pushed through into the night. The desert air hit her hard, hot, and unwelcoming. She stumbled to the water trough and dropped to her knees, clutching its rim as if it might hold her upright. The moon cast her reflection in the rippling water, a broken bride, cheeks streaked with tears and dust, her face painted in sorrow and disgrace. From inside came laughter, low, cutting, cruel. Words followed her out, ruined woman. Unwanted, shameful, her stomach clenched. She pressed her palms to her face, trying to block out the sound, but whispers carried on the wind, clawing at her ears. In this land, reputation was life, and hers had just been buried under Samuel's boots. A church bell tolled faintly in the distance, each mournful clang drifting across the night. It sounded less like a wedding bell now, and more like a funeral dirge for her hopes. Her future, perhaps even her life. Her body trembled. She was not cold, the night air burned, but fear and despair left her shaking as though ice gripped her bones. She had no kin, no shelter, no coin. The world had closed its doors. Then dash footsteps. Deliberate, steady. Drawing nearer from behind. Her heart leapt into her throat. Men saw a cast-off woman as easy prey. She stiffened, gripping the trough tighter, her breath sharp and shallow. Steps grew closer until they stopped just behind her. A shadow spilled across her bent form, blocking the moonlight, broad and unmoving like a mountain. She did not dare turn, but something in the air shifted. This presence carried no laughter, no cruelty. Someone had seen. Someone had heard, and someone was not walking away. The saloon's silence hadn't only belonged to the rancher and his discarded bride. It had belonged to him too. Dakota had been sitting in the far corner, half in shadow, half in lamplight, nursing a tin cup of black coffee while the townsfolk drowned themselves in whiskey. He had watched every moment unfold, the way Neeja had stood trembling in her wedding dress, a cruel curl of Samuel Harker's lip, the way the crowd leaned in like scavenger birds waiting for a carcass to fall. He had seen enough of such things in his life to know what would follow. A woman cast aside in this land had fewer rights than a stray mule. No family to speak for her, no property to protect her, no name to shield her. She would be left to the wolves, sometimes the wolves on four legs, but more often the wolves that were spurs and carried guns. Dakota's dark eyes followed her as she stumbled through the swinging doors, lace tearing, veil slipping from her hair. His jaw tightened. He had witnessed cruelty from both settlers and his own people, but there was something about this kind of cruelty, a man shaming a woman publicly, stripping her dignity bare, that made his blood burn hotter than fire. Rancher Samuel Harker puffed himself up after Neeja fled, dragging on a cigar and letting the room fill with his smug authority. "Mark my words," he said, sweeping the crowd with his eyes. "No decent man will take her now. That's the end of it." Dakota set his cup down. The scrape of tin on wood was louder than he intended. Heads turned, suspicious eyes narrowing. He was no stranger to the stares. His long black hair flowed down his shoulders, unbound, catching what little lamplight remained. A necklace of bone and turquoise hung against his bare chest, the firelight gleaming across the muscle and scars there. Around one arm, strips of leather tied tight with beads and feathers marked him as a warrior who had seen battle. Card players snorted. "Don't tell me the Injun's got an opinion on it," he muttered, loud enough for Dakota to hear. Dakota didn't answer. He didn't need to. He rose slowly, his height filling the corner, his frame towering above the nearest man. Every movement carried the weight of calm strength, the kind of strength that didn't need shouting to be heard. His gaze swept to Samuel. For a long moment, the two men regarded one another, the rancher's arrogance clashing with the warrior's silence. Samuel shifted uneasily, though he tried to hide it behind another drag of his cigar. "What? You think you'd do better with her?" he sneered, voice dripping with contempt. "She ain't fit for a man like me, let alone you." The words hung in the smoky air. Dakota let them pass. Words were cheap, and men like Samuel filled the West with too many of them. What mattered were actions, and Dakota had already made his choice the moment Neeja fell against that water trough outside. He stepped past the tables, boots thudding against sawdust, the tomahawk at his side catching the lamplight with each stride. He didn't bother to look at the rancher again. Samuel's words didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the woman outside, broken and alone. As he pushed through the doors into the night, the desert wind slapped his skin, hot and dry, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. His eyes fell on Neeja. She was still, kneeling at the trough, her shoulders shaking, her veil half torn from her hair. Her hands gripped the rim so tightly her knuckles gleamed white, as if she were holding on to the last thing keeping her from being swept away entirely. Dakota paused in the doorway, his breath slow and steady, letting the sight burn into him. He had known hunger, he had known loss, he had known the scorn of towns like this that looked at him as less than human. But what he saw in Neeja was something different, A fight to live, even when the world tried to bury her. The night air thickened, heavy with silence. He took a step forward. His moccasins stirred dust into the wind. Neeja stiffened. She did not turn yet, but he saw her back straighten as if bracing for another blow. She thought he had come to finish what Samuel had begun. Dakota's voice, when it came, was low and steady, like the deep rumble of thunder on the horizon. "He may not take you," he said, each word carrying across the quiet street, "but I will not see you left to die." The wind hushed, as though the land itself listened. Neeja finally lifted her head, her tear-streaked face catching the silver light of the moon. For a moment, disbelief flashed in her eyes, followed quickly by something else. Something fragile and flickering. Hope. And Dakota knew, in that instant, that the next step he took would change not only her fate, but his own. The desert night clung to Neeja like a burial shroud. The saloon doors had swallowed the last of the laughter, but its echoes clung to her ears, whispering shame over and over until it felt carved into her very bones. She knelt by the trough, staring at her distorted reflection in the moonlit water. The woman gazing back at her was not the bride she had imagined. She was no blushing wife, no cherished partner. She looked like a ghost, eyes swollen, face smeared with dust and tears, veil hanging in tatters. Her breath rattled, quick and shallow. Each exhale carried the weight of her ruined future. Samuel's words hadn't just dismissed her, they had branded her. In this town, men's words were law, and his decree of unfit would follow her like a rattlesnake's shadow. No rancher would offer her work. No family would take her in. Even the boarding house women would bar their doors once. The gossip spread. Her fingers tightened on the wood of the trough, splinters biting her skin. Memories crashed over her like desert storms. She saw her parents' wagon broken on the trail, her mother's face pale with fever, her father's body buried beneath a cairn of rough stones. She had carried herself through that loss with nothing but grit, walking barefoot for miles until she stumbled into a settlement. She had endured hunger, loneliness, the sneers of men who offered only one kind of shelter. And still she had survived. But this felt different. This was not the wilderness clawing at her body. This was the cruelty of people clawing at her soul. Tears threatened again, but she bit them back hard, shaking her head violently. She would not let Samuel Harker own her tears. She would not let him bury her. Yet the truth pressed sharp against her chest. She had nowhere to go. The West did not forgive the weak, and she had been made weaker still by shame. A sound startled her, the faint crunch of boots in dust. She turned her head sharply, her eyes narrowing through the blur of tears. There he was, the warrior. He stood just behind her, tall and unflinching, his silhouette framed by the pale glow of the saloon's lantern light. Shirtless, his skin gleamed bronze in the moonlight, marked with scars and strength. His long black hair caught the wind, strands whipping across his shoulders, adorned with beads and feathers that whispered of battles and traditions far older than this town. Around his neck, bone and turquoise glinted faintly, a necklace heavy with history. He didn't speak at first. His silence wasn't cruel like Samuel's. It was steady, grounding, like a mountain rising out of the earth. His gaze held hers, and though Neeja wanted to look away, she found she couldn't. His eyes were dark, but within them was no mockery, no scorn, only a deep steadiness that felt strange in this world where every look cut like a knife. "Why?" she whispered hoarsely, her voice breaking. "Why did he do this?" The words weren't really meant for him, but they spilled anyway, desperate and raw. "What am I now if not a wife? What is left of me?" The warrior finally spoke, his voice low, deep, carrying like distant thunder. "You are alive," the words struck her. Simple, almost harsh. Yet they rooted in her chest. Alive, not ruined, not discarded. Alive. She shook her head, laughing bitterly through her tears. Alive means nothing out here. Alive gets you starved, beaten, left for coyotes. He stepped closer, his shadow enveloping her. Alive, he repeated, slower now, means you can still choose. The wind stilled. His presence seemed to push back the night, even as her despair gnawed at her. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. That choice was a luxury stolen from her long ago. And yet, she remembered the trail, remembered the hunger, remembered surviving when she should have perished. Somehow, she had chosen to walk forward back. Then, a tremor of fire flickered in her chest, faint but real. Neeja pushed herself upright, brushing dust from her dress though the stains remained. Her hand shook, but she forced her spine straighter, forced her chin to lift. She met his eyes again, the tears still there, but something new behind them now. You don't even know me, she whispered. I know enough, Dakota replied. His gaze didn't waver. It was as if he saw beyond her veil, beyond Samuel's words, beyond shame itself. And for the first time since her world had shattered, Neeja felt something stir that was not despair. It was defiance. The West had tried to bury her tonight, but she wasn't ready to lie down. Not yet. And as the warrior's figure loomed beside her, she realized she might not have to face it alone. The desert street lay hushed, as though even the wind waited to hear what the warrior would do. The saloon's swinging doors rocked gently on their hinges, letting the yellow lamplight spill across the dust where Neeja knelt. She pressed her palms to the trough, trembling, torn between despair and the strange calm of the man who had followed her outside. Dakota's eyes lingered on her. In her he saw more than shame, he saw endurance. A woman who had survived hunger, grief, and the merciless cruelty of men, and still had fire left in her bones. He had crossed many towns and seen countless souls broken by far less. Something about her fight, the way she lifted her chin despite tears, spoke to him deeper than words ever could. He took a step forward. The dust stirred under his moccasins, curling like smoke around his ankles. His shadow lengthened across the trough, wrapping her small frame in its shelter. You cannot stay here, he said, his voice low and steady. They will not protect you. They will only circle like vultures. Neeja swallowed hard, her lips trembling. Then where do I go? Her voice cracked, raw from holding back tears. I have nothing, no one. If I leave this town, I'll die out there. If I stay, I'll die here. Tell me, warrior, what choice do I have? Dakota's jaw tightened. She had spoken the truth of the West life here was a coin flip between survival and death. But still, she was wrong about one thing. She was not alone, not anymore. You have me, he said simply, her breath caught. She stared at him as though trying to decide if she had heard correctly. The words were too simple, too unadorned. With promise, yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. She rose slowly, her torn veil falling to the dirt. The lamplight glinted off the beads in his hair, the turquoise at his chest, the scars etched into his skin. He was unlike any man she had known, silent, fierce, unyielding. His presence filled the night like a great oak rooted against the storm. Why? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Why would you take a ruined woman's burden as your own? Dakota's gaze never left hers. Because no one is ruined for living, only for giving up. The words hit her like a spark to dry tinder. She had been ready to fall, to vanish into dust. Yet here was a man, cast aside in his own way by towns like this, who spoke as though her life still mattered. As though she could still choose. He extended his hand. Not as a demand, but as a promise. The silence stretched. Behind them, laughter rose again from inside the saloon, mocking and cruel. The sound sealed her choice. She could not go back to those eyes, those whispers. She would rather face the merciless desert than live another moment in that cage of shame. Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. His grip was firm, steady, grounding. For the first time that night, warmth spread through her chest that wasn't born of rage or humiliation. It was the warmth of not being abandoned. Dakota pulled her gently to her feet. "Come," he said. "The night is long, but the trail is longer. We ride before the dawn." She nodded, still shaky, still unsure of what lay ahead. But as he guided her toward his painted horse tethered by the hitching post, a sliver of strength returned. Each step she took felt like she was shedding the chain Samuel had tried to wrap around her. The horse snorted softly, stamping its hooves in the dust. Dakota lifted her easily onto its back before mounting in front, his powerful frame a shield against the night. The desert stretched before them, vast and untamed, filled with both danger and promise. As they rode out of town, Neeja turned her head for one last glance. The saloon glowed in the distance, voices carrying faintly across the dark, but it no longer had power over her. The shame Samuel had tried to brand on her was already fading, swallowed by the sound of hoofbeats and the steady presence of the warrior who had chosen not to turn away. The stars burned fierce above them, scattered across the endless sky. Neeja drew in a shaky breath, letting the dry night air fill her lungs. For the first time in a long time, the future did not feel like a sentence. Beside Dakota, riding into the unknown, she felt the faint, fragile beginning of something else, something she had thought lost forever. The desert night was colder than Neeja had ever imagined. Her bare feet were raw from the jagged stones hidden in the sand, and her torn wedding dress clung to her skin like a ghost of the life she'd been promised but never received. Each step felt like a punishment, each breath ragged with grief. She had no idea where the warrior was leading her, only that the rhythm of his steady stride gave her something to cling to, an anchor in a world that had just cast her away. He moved with purpose, his figure outlined against the silver wash of moonlight. His long black hair rippled in the wind, the feathers and beads woven into it whispering like secrets of old tribes. The muscles of his bare chest glistened with sweat despite the chill, and the tribal jewelry of turquoise and bone rattled faintly. With each step, there was no hesitation in him, no glance back, no question of whether she could keep up. He expected her to follow. At last, when her strength threatened to give out completely, the warrior stopped near a cluster of tall red rocks rising like monuments from the desert floor. He crouched down, silent as a shadow, and began to gather dry brush and branches. Sparks flew when he struck stone against steel, and soon a fire bloomed between them, painting his strong features in orange light. Neeja lowered herself beside it, trembling as warmth licked at her frozen hands. For a long time, he said nothing. Only the crackle of the fire and the restless sighs of the desert filled the silence. Finally, he looked at her with eyes as dark and deep as the canyon beyond them. "You carry shame that is not yours," he said in a low voice, his accent shaping the words in a way that made them sound like sacred truths. Neeja's throat tightened. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the flood of tears that threatened. He said I wasn't enough, that I was ruined. Her voice broke on the word, her shame like a dagger twisted into her chest. The warrior leaned closer, his expression unreadable. A man's cruelty does not make you less. It only reveals his weakness. The fire popped, sending sparks up into the night sky. Neeja looked at him, searching for mockery, for pity, for the disgust she had seen in her husband's eyes, but there was none. Only calm strength, as though he had seen countless storms and knew they could be endured. "You do not know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I know that you are not broken. And I know that tonight you are under my protection." Something in the way he spoke, firm yet gentle, made her heart ache. Protection was something she had never truly known, not from her family, not from the man who had cast her aside. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let those words wrap around her like a blanket. But doubt gnawed at her. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" The warrior tilted his head slightly, as though weighing the question. At last he said, "Because no one deserves to be thrown away like dust. And because your fight is not finished." Neeja lowered her gaze, staring into the fire as tears slid down her cheeks. She did not feel strong. She felt like a broken doll carried by a stranger through a land that had no mercy. And yet, for the first time in hours, maybe in years, she felt a spark of something she couldn't name. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the warrior's presence itself, steady and unshakable. The desert wind howled around them, but the fire burned bright. The warrior stood suddenly, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. His hand rested on the handmade spear at his side, every muscle tensed as though he sensed something approaching. Neeja froze, her breath catching in her chest. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He only motioned for her to stay close to the fire, his gaze fixed on the dark ridge beyond the rocks. The night seemed to hold its breath, the silence before the storm. For the first time, Neeja realized that while she had been mourning her ruined future, the warrior had already placed himself between her and danger. Whoever or whatever was coming, he was ready to meet it. And in that moment, she began to understand. This man was more than just her protector. He was about to change the course of her fate. The night deepened, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. Only the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote broke the silence. Neeja sat close to the flames, her hands cupped around them as though they were the only warmth left in the world. Across from her, the warrior sat cross-legged, still as a statue, his long black hair glinting in the firelight. The flickering glow danced across his chest, highlighting every scar carved into his skin, each one a story of survival. Neeja watched him, her mind torn between fear and trust. He had saved her from shame, from the cruel rejection of a man who had promised her a future but delivered only scorn. Yet now, under the endless spread of stars, she wondered if she had only leapt from one danger into another. "Why did you follow me?" she finally whispered, her voice breaking the fragile stillness. The warrior lifted his head slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers. They were steady, unyielding, but behind them flickered something softer, something human. "Because you were cast away," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of stone and wind. "And no soul deserves to be left for the vultures." His words struck her harder than she expected, and she lowered her gaze, fighting the sting in her eyes. "But you don't even know me," she said. "I know enough," he replied, his gaze returning to the fire. "I know you were betrayed. I know your heart still beats when it could have been crushed. That is enough." The flames snapped, sparks shooting into the sky like tiny stars. Neeja hugged her arms around herself, shivering not from the cold, but from the strange calm his words gave her. For the first time since her world had shattered, she felt seen not as something broken, but as someone still alive. "You don't speak like other men," she said softly. He turned toward her again, his hair falling over his shoulder like a dark river. The tribal jewelry at his chest caught the light, turquoise and bone glowing against his bronze skin. "I am not like other men," he said, simply. A quiet fell between them, heavy with meaning. Neeja's mind replayed the moment of her rejection, the cruel words spat in front of everyone, the jeers and laughter that followed. Shame had clung to her like a brand, searing her spirit. And yet here she was, breathing, sitting beside a warrior who treated her as though she were worth saving. The wind carried the smell of sagebrush and smoke. In the distance an owl called, its mournful cry echoing across the canyon. Neeja lifted her head staring out into the night. "Where will I go now?" she murmured. "I have no home, no family who will take me. The town," her voice faltered, "they'll never forget." The warrior rose to his feet in one fluid motion, tall and commanding against the backdrop of stars. He walked to the edge of the firelight, his silhouette carved in shadow and flame. "You will walk forward," he said, "not back." His words were firm, yet not unkind. He pointed to the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was beginning to pale the sky. "There are lands where men's whispers cannot chain you. There are people who will see you not for what they think you are, but for the strength you carry." Neeja blinked at him, her breath catching. "And you?" she asked. "Will you leave me too?" The warrior turned, his long hair brushing his shoulders as he faced her fully. "I walk where I am needed," he said, his voice steady. "For now, the path runs with you." Something inside her stirred a fragile spark, like the fire they tended. For the first time since her life unraveled, she dared to believe she might not be completely alone. The dawn crept slowly, painting the mesas in shades of rose and gold. The fire dimmed, surrendering to the light. Neeja rose from her place, her torn dress fluttering in the morning wind. She looked at the warrior, and though words failed her, gratitude shone in her eyes. The warrior nodded once as though he understood what she could not say. Then he turned toward the trail ahead, silent but sure. His presence alone was a vow that though the world had cast her aside, her story was far from over. And as Neeja followed, each step was no longer weighed with despair, but with the first fragile threads of hope. The morning sun rose like a blade over the desert horizon, cutting through the remnants of night with its first sharp beams. The world was painted gold and red, every cactus, rock, and mesa shimmering with a light that seemed almost holy. Neeja blinked against the brightness, her body aching from the long night, yet her heart beating with a strange, restless strength. She was not the same woman who had been cast aside at the church steps. Something within her had shifted, something that no insult, no rejection, could ever touch again. The warrior stood at the ridge above her, his tall frame catching the first light of dawn. Shirtless, his broad chest gleamed with a bronze sheen, his long black hair loose and alive in the desert wind. His tribal jewelry, bone, turquoise, and feathers braided with care, seemed to glow as if the sun itself honored him. For a long moment he said nothing, his dark eyes fixed on the distance, scanning the horizon. His silence was not cold, it was deliberate, strong, as though he carried the weight of not just her safety, but her very spirit. Finally, he turned to her. "You have been broken, but you are not ruined," he said, his voice deep low like the steady rumble of thunder, rolling far across the plains. "The man who cast you aside spoke from fear, not truth. You are more than his blindness." Tears filled Neeja's eyes, not of weakness but of release. She had waited for words like these her entire life, words that saw her not as something to be traded or judged, but as a soul worth protecting. She rose slowly, clutching her torn dress, and walked toward him. "What do I do now?" she whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. The warrior lifted his hand, pointing toward the distant ridges where smoke curled faintly into the sky. "You walk forward. You do not return to him. His rejection is not your grave. Out there," he gestured, "is a new path. Harder, yes, lonely at times. But it is yours. No man can take it." Neeja followed his gaze. The land stretched endlessly, wild and merciless, yet beautiful beyond words. In that moment, she understood that the life she thought was over was in truth only beginning. But the sound of hoofbeats shattered the silence. Both she and the warrior turned sharply, eyes narrowing. From the east came a group of riders' men armed, dust kicking up behind them like a storm. Her stomach clenched. She recognized one of the horses. It was her husband, his face twisted with fury as he rode, flanked by men carrying rifles. "There!" he shouted, his voice slicing through the desert air. "She belongs to me. That savage has stolen her." Neeja froze, every bone in her body screaming with fear. But before she could move, the warrior stepped in front of her, his body a wall of muscle and resolve. He raised his spear, planting the butt firmly into the ground. His long black hair whipped behind him, feathers dancing like banners of defiance. "She belongs to no man," the warrior thundered. "Not you, not me. Herself alone." The riders slowed, their horses skittish under the rising sun. Her husband sneered, his face pale with rage. "Stand aside, heathen, or die where you stand." The warrior did not flinch. His muscles coiled, his chest rising like a mountain. "Then let death come," he said simply. The standoff stretched in the golden morning light. Dust swirled around them, the desert holding its breath. And in that moment, Neeja realized what courage truly was: not the absence of fear, but the refusal to surrender to it. She stepped forward, past the warrior's side, her voice clear, sharp, uncheckable. "I am not your property," she shouted to her husband. "You cast me aside. I will not return. Not now. Not ever." Her words echoed like gunfire across the land. The husband's grip faltered on his reins. His men exchanged uncertain glances, their rifles wavering. They saw not a fallen bride, but a woman who had stood up from the ashes of shame, guarded by a warrior whose strength was carved into the very earth. For a long, terrible moment, it seemed blood would stain the sand. Then, slowly, the riders began to pull back. Her husband cursed, spitting into the dust, but even he could not hide the fear in his eyes. The warrior's stance, the fire in Neeja's voice, it was more than he could face. With a final glare, he yanked his reins and wheeled his horse away. Riders vanished into the horizon, swallowed by the desert. Silence returned, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Neeja's body trembled, tears streaking her dusty cheeks. She turned to the warrior. "You saved me," she breathed. He shook his head, lowering his spear. "No," he said softly. "You saved yourself. I only stood beside you." In the blazing light of dawn, Neeja finally felt whole. She was no longer the woman who had begged to be accepted. She was Neeja, strong, unbroken, and free. And as the warrior looked down at her, the faintest smile touched his lips, like the first bloom of hope in the desert. The journey was only beginning.